Indus Valley had a population of 5 million. And there are many reasons for that. One being there was no ice age in India. People kept on multiplying. Fertile land, pleasant climate even during the ice age. So India had a very large population. This is a swastika. As you guys know, swastika is a very important symbol in Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism. And what you see is not just swastika, but the development of swastika. You know, there's an issue. Indus scripts are from 3000 BCE. We all know that Sanskrit didn't come into India till 1200 BCE. Just from looking at the artifacts, we know other things. One of them is that they had weapons. Obviously, due to climate change, when they abandoned the sites, they took most of the metal with them. Metal, even today, is very valuable. In those days, it was the most valuable. But we do find discarded weapons, fish hooks, harpoons, and things like that. Many of them were made of copper, some of them were made of bronze, some of them were made of iron copper alloys. So it's 25% iron, which gives it certain interesting properties. For some of you are following me, you have seen my work, you may have seen my presentations, videos, and so on. The decipherment of the Indus script at depth is in many videos. In this particular video, I'm not going to duplicate most of them. I'll summarize it enough that you have a background. We want to discuss the implications of this discovery and this decipherment. So, to start with, essentially, how is the script deciphered? It is deciphered using a known method called the cryptogram method. This method has been around for centuries and has been used to decipher things like the cipher of Mary Queen of Scots. Somewhat similarly, it has been used to decipher the Linear B inscription, and so on. It can be used to decipher really any cipher that is not logographic, provided sufficient text is found, sufficient body of text is found. The great thing about this method is that there is a quantitative unit or threshold of reliability. So, decipherment can be reliable or it can be dubious. Dubious meaning, yes, it could be, you can say, yes, this could be a possible decipherment, but there could be others as well. But a reliable decipherment is that which you can mathematically be certain that there is only one valid decipherment. So, this quantification was done by the mathematician Claude Shannon, who has his paper is the most cited mathematical paper in history with almost 75,000 citations. So, I'm just using his theory and his methods applied to the Indus script. So, just to give you guys an idea of what a cryptogram is, there used to be cryptograms in newspapers. On the puzzle page, you used to see a message in a different alphabet, and you just had to find what is the equivalent in the normal alphabet. So, in this is an example I give in many places. The black is the enciphered alphabet. You can of course use any symbols you want. You can put symbols of other languages, you can put emojis, it does not matter. The actual symbols are not going to make a difference as far as enciphering a message is concerned. And in the blue is the deciphered text. Okay. So, when you decipher it, you have also figured out what the enciphered symbols stand for. So, in this example, GOPH stands for FIVE. So, G is F, O is I, and so on. So, what does it mean when you say this is reliable? I know for sure this is the only one. Why is that possible? That's simply because when you have a word, like if you look at the first line, second word, the enciphered word is LORWNHX. This is a 7-letter word, and in a normal small to medium sized dictionary, there are more than 7,000 options for you to fit in this, because there is no repeating letters. So, there are 7,000 of these, but if you if you look at the patterns of repetitions in certain words, like on the third line, the first word millennium is the only word that fits that pattern. And if you assign those letters to enable yourself to read it as millennium, then what has happened is L, O, R, W and E are assigned, and your choice in that previous word, the second word on the first line, now drops from 7,000 to about 4. So, it could be minuses, it could be minutes, it could be minuted and so on. So, what has happened is what is called the equivocation, which is the amount of choices you have, drops every time you make a choice on for some other word. So, in this case, if I were to force the second word to be something else, some other 7-letter word, then what would happen is it would break my reading of millennium. Millennium would not be a readable word. Okay. So, the more assignments you make, the fewer choices you have, and if you make a mistake, there will be many unreadable parts of the text. And at a certain point, what happens is you have crossed a threshold beyond which everything is essentially assigned, and you have essentially read everything. Okay. So, that threshold is called the unicity distance. There is a mathematical way to measure it, and for those who are technically inclined, you can read my paper. There is a great detail in which we have I have explained how to calculate it, how the decipherment is done step by step. You can trace through that, and you can see essentially something like this. Here is how we go through symbols one after the other and find the values. So, this is just a straight line thing for you to follow. There are many different starting points you can use, just like in that in that example you use millennium, you could use a different word, but eventually you will come to the same values. And once all the symbols are solved, if you just sort them by the values, you get something like this. These are the different values for the different Indus script symbols. And once you have these symbols, you can arrange them and look at if there are any words that start with that particular sound, and you are able to reconstruct the actual alphabet, the names of the alphabets. So, essentially in this example, for the first letter of the, that is essentially a rice plant. So, the only word that looks like that symbol is a rice plant, is Tandula. And once you do all of these, you notice something else, that these are very close. They are it's as if someone transmitted these verbally, and either due to a dialect difference or due to some other corruption, the words, the symbols got slightly mutated. Okay. So, this is essentially the Indus script. And what do we how do we know we have read beyond the unicity distance? The unicity distance comes to under 500, and if you read the longest 50 inscriptions, you cross 500 very comfortably. And I have glossed all the translations, so that there is a grammatical evidence or a grammatical explanation of why each of those words is passed in a certain way. So, remember, the translation is a post decipherment activity, and someone may be able to parse it slightly differently. That does not mean the decipherment changes. It is just that the same sentence or the same string of letters can be parsed in multiple ways. So, one example is if you have leader got in, like without spaces or anything, you can read it as led got in, or leader got in, or lead got in, something like that. So, you have 3 or 4 options. And but the moment you read beyond a certain amount, which I have gone more than 10 times that amount, you can be confident that it has been decisively deciphered. So, the Indus Valley civilization, in case you guys are not aware, so from the scripts we know a bunch of things, but before that, just from looking at the artifacts we know other things. One of them is that they had weapons. Obviously, when they, due to climate change, when they abandoned the sites, they took most of the metal with them. Metal even today is very valuable. In those days, it was the most valuable things. But we do find discarded weapons, fish hooks, harpoons and things like that, and they were made of, many of them were made of copper, some of them were made of bronze, some of them were made of iron copper alloys. So it's 25% iron, which makes it, which gives it certain interesting properties. They had cotton and silk. They had standardized weight system and writing. Standardized meaning is not that in a town they are all using the same weights, but across all sites, more than 1,000 sites, and across hundreds of years, they were using the same standardized weights, same script, and therefore, and the same writing, which means that they are essentially they are not individual city states, but they're just a large civilization that has uniform understanding of their nationhood. The administration is believed to be standardized as well as civilization wide because of the way the town planning and everything works. They had international trade with Mesopotamia. They were also sent mercenaries to Sumeria to help win a war. So they were a very highly sophisticated, militarized, advanced urban society, probably the most advanced for its time. Only Egypt, I think, may have exceeded the sophistication. So you may have heard that the Indus civilization started declining in 1900 BC and completely declined by 1300 BC, or there are different dates depending on the paper. What actually happened is that by 1900 BC, the steatite seals stopped appearing in the archaeological record, or they reduced dramatically. They still appear once, here and there. You get once in a while some seals. So the inference was that, oh, they must have stopped, they must have moved out, or something like that. But we also find metal seals made of silver and copper, and the seals, the steatite seals, they would break and throw because they were obsolete, or some other reasons they are no longer they no longer are valid. But metal, you don't need to break and throw, you can just recast it, remelt it, and create new objects. So we don't actually know for certain that the civilization stopped at 1900 BCE. In Mohenjo-daro, for example, we have Kushan coins, we have stupas. So it is, in many places you see that continuity. Vadanagar, which is Prime Minister Modi's hometown, has continuous occupation from 1400 BC to present day. So it is hard to say the whole civilization declined. This particular set of maps illustrates how the sites changed and moved as part of during the climate change. So in the mature phase, 2600 BC onwards, at the top left, you see many sites, and there are many in the west, in what is today Balochistan, which is a part of Pakistan today. And as time passes, in the late phase, the western sites most of them have been abandoned, and there is still sites in Gujarat and Punjab, Haryana, and eventually at the very late phase, Gujarat also is abandoned. You only have sites in Haryana. The Haryana sites are undisturbed from almost the very beginning. So some of the early sites are Kunal in Haryana, which starts at 4000 BC, and there's a site called Jognakhera, which is active till about 800 BC. So Haryana, which is essentially the center of where all the Vedic stories and everything are located, has been active from the very beginning to essentially the start of the Janapada period. So, what happens after 700, 800, 700 BC? The Janapada, there is a new kind of state organization. Most of the technology and civilization moves to the Gangetic plain, and you have Janapadas and so on. So, speaking more about continuity, if you look at the various things in the Indus Valley, you find those artifacts or the symbols even today. So, this is an example of the priest king's diadem that is wearing on his forehead, and this is a few years ago there was this picture published of a wedding where they are wearing something similar. This is very interesting. This is on the left is a figurine of a female with parted hair. There is some red powder on the parting. It is not very clear, but there is actually a little dot on the forehead. You can see like the dent. You can see a little bit of like a circular shape there, and there is jewelry on her neck and on her chest. So, if you just search in Google, beautiful Indian woman with jewelry, you get images like this, which look very similar. So, that style of jewelry, that style of dressing up, that style of wearing sindoor is still present. And you can, for any figurine, you can do this research. Just Google. Only thing I suggest is after, just clear your browser cache, because depending on what you search, you can avoid some explaining to do. Okay. So, there are also continuity in addition to the jewelry and the personal effects. There are continuity of stories. So, this is a Panchatantra, which is on a pot in the Indus script. The story is written down. This is about the water in a pot, and the deer cannot drink it, and then the crow puts stones and gets the water level up and drinks it. This particular story is of Tilottama, that is Sunda and Upasunda fighting over her. This is a story that can be depicted in only one way. There is a woman and there is two men who are holding one of her hands and they are fighting each other. You cannot draw it in any other way, and this is a very unique story. And this same imagery, iconography, appears in Cambodia in one of the temples, and you see you can draw it in only one way. So, they have also drawn the same thing. It is the same story. So, those stories continue even today. This is the story of Shivaratri, that is Lubdaka. This is in different Puranas, as different names, but I am just picking one. Lubdaka is in the forest. It is late at night. He hears a tiger. He climbs on a tree, and he does not want to fall asleep, because if he falls asleep, the tiger will eat him. So, to stay awake, he keeps picking a leaf, says the name of Shiva and throws it on the ground, and that happens to be a bilva tree, and that counts as a prayer. So, staying up the whole night is what you do in Shivaratri. That tradition starts in Indus Valley. More interesting than the stories and the jewelry and personal effects and pottery and all that is the symbols. Now, symbols represent an abstraction that must have happened over years or thousands of years, or at least hundreds of years, of that symbol being important to something. So, this particular symbol, which many people call the infinity knot, exists as a seal or as a artifact from Mohenjo-daro, that is replicated in many places, in many inscriptions. So, I think this particular one is from, if I remember right, it's in Bhattiprolu or one of these inscriptions. So, it is also in different cave places. There are rings people wear today that have this symbol and so on, that have the same pattern. This is a swastika. As you guys know, swastika is a very important symbol in Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and what you see is not just swastika, but the development of swastika, the ideas that develop. So, if you see a symbol attested in only one place, that could just be an import, it could be an experimentation, but to know that the symbol has meaning and value and cultural significance, you would need to see that symbol in many places, in many different ways, on different media, okay, and across time and space. So you see that, and these are just 3 examples. There are actually many, many dozens of examples of swastika in the Indus Valley. So for example, there's a stylized swastika on the left, there's swastika buttons on the right, and in the center you see something very interesting. It's a fractal. It's a fractal. You see that outer shape with the 3 squares and a square in the second row? The swastikas are also made of that shape. They are made out of 4 of those shapes, each individual swastika. So using this, more of these bigger pieces, you can create a bigger swastika, and you can go, scale it up and down into infinity, like it's a true fractal. So they knew about fractals as well in those days. And fractals today we also use where? In temple design. You see this big gopura has smaller gopuras around it. That's a fractal design that exists because such structures have more resistance to cracking and to earthquakes and so on. And speaking about symbols, the leftmost symbol you see is from Indus Valley. It is a figure that is separating 2 tigers under a chakra. Okay. So this represents separation of 2 tigers from Atharva Veda in the funeral hymn, where you separate 2 tigers, the good and the bad. You let go of the bad and you keep the good. So this symbol eventually became keeping order under the Dharma chakra. That chakra is a circle of it's essentially order, like the cycle of time. That symbol eventually became, you see on the top right there, it's a Haryana. They have what looks like it could be also a lion, but it could be a tiger also. And then in Mathura in the bottom right, and in the center you guys know it's from Sanchi. That's a Mauryan symbol. You even see the wheel there. So the wheel and the lines under it represent the state, not the nation, the state. The job of the state is to keep order and to prevent chaos. Now this symbol is actually a very ancient symbol. It first appears in Ratnagiri in 10,000 BC. And recently when the moon lander Chandrayaan-2 landed on the moon, the tracks had this symbol so that when it moves on the moon dust, those symbols are implanted on the moon. So this symbol from 10,000 BC, the beginning of Indian civilization, when they had this first notion of this in an abstract form, has persisted so long and now has crossed into a different world. So that is continuity, and that is tradition, and that's ancientness. So now when we have all of these, people ask me, this is all great, but I'm glad you deciphered the Indus script. I'm glad you can read all the inscriptions. But it's, there's an issue. Indus scripts are from 3000 BCE. We all know that Sanskrit didn't come into India till 1200 BC. And so there are different ways to answer this question, and I want to, before just giving you an answer, I want you guys to understand how to think about these things, or rather how I think about these things, and to know when someone tells you something, when people say things, are they saying based on facts? Are they just repeating what they heard? Are they just talking about their feelings? Because those 3 different things have 3 different ways you need to address them. Okay? So the things that we did, the decipherment is mathematical, and mathematics is a science. And so we have to kind of define what science is very compactly to separate that from things that are not science. So what is science? So in science, the most important thing is empirical data. Empirical means something you have observed, something you have measured, something is connected with your perception and your analysis. And from that empirical data, you can create a testable model. So what the model does is it gives you an understanding and a way to explain that data. And if it's the right model, when new data arrives, the model will be able to make correct predictions that, hey, if I get this new data, then this will be the result. So science is essentially a set of reproducible and repeatable experiments. It is a set of falsifiable statements. So if I say something like, if I say something that's non-falsifiable, like if I say, in the other corner of the universe there are UFOs, there are aliens, it's not falsifiable until you actually see them. Okay? But if I say there are no aliens ever, then what happens is if you find an alien, you can falsify it. Okay? This is a little, it's a little pop culture type of example, but I'll give you a more standardized mathematical example. If I say that there is no prime number that has only ones and zeros, okay, that's a falsifiable statement because you can find a prime number that matches that criteria. Okay? So science is a set of falsifiable statements, and until it's falsified, that is a state of science. And scientific models have predictive power. So these three characteristics, you can consider them as equivalent. Okay? So that's what science is. So so now what about humanities? There are things that are not completely scientific because you don't have all the evidence, you don't have all the pieces. Those are the domain of humanities. In humanities, your goal is to understand things to the best of the data, and not to say that this is true, I know for sure, this is unchangeable. You cannot make any of that. So history, for example, is a good use of humanities. So when people say something like, in the Shunga era, this king did this, this and that, you may have certain sparse evidence for it. So until you dig up new evidence, that's your understanding of it. And sometimes what happens is that turns into dogma. And in dogma, what happens is you stop updating your model. You are so in love with your model that when new things arrive, you don't want to change. Okay? So the two approaches are called critical approach and the apologetic approach. In science, we use the critical approach. We always see, can we falsify this? And we discuss how to falsify something. Is it falsifiable? And then we present it. In apologetics, you just see if it's possible. You say, is it possible that, this happened due to divine intervention? Is it possible that because you're a Scorpio, you are like this? So you are looking for a small shred of possibility, and then you say, yes, it's possible. Okay. In critical approach, it's irrelevant whether something is possible or not. What matters is, out of the millions of things that are possible, which possibilities actually have evidence backing it, and you select only those. Okay. So there's the theory that the language, Sanskrit came from outside, started as a humanities concern because there was lack of data, and unfortunately with all the new data, they have not incorporated any of it when they're exposed to it, and now it's starting to become dogmatic. The main reason is the lack of discontinuity. So if you guys, in case you guys don't know the hypothesis, I'll shortly summarize it. I'm sure all of you know it. Essentially, the idea is that Indus Valley civilization, which was a sophisticated civilization, would have ended up absorbing any migrants, and the migrants would just adopt this language and culture. But Indus Valley civilization collapsed. There was a discontinuity that enabled people to come from outside and then create a new urbanization. So not the old people who stopped the urbanization, the new people who came in created the urbanization, although they were not urbanized anywhere before, and they created the new civilization. Okay? So without this discontinuity, you cannot have this narrative. But as you can see, there is no real discontinuity, and as you can see, not just in the sites, but also in the fashion, the personal effects, stories, everything else, astronomical observations, there is no discontinuity. The original story was this, that so I don't know how many of you, the people who are old enough probably know this. The original idea was India was full of essentially primitive people. They don't actually say hunter gatherers, but that's essentially what they kind of imply. And there were hordes of people who essentially came from outside, killed a bunch of people here, civilized them, created a new language, and so on and so forth. And this was when this was proposed during the colonial times, during the 16th, 17th centuries. It made sense to them. It made sense because that's what was happening around the world. Around when they could look around, the Americas were being colonized by Spain, Portugal, and also England. They were going over, killing a bunch of people, taking their stuff, impregnating the women, and changing the language. Same thing in Australia, in parts of Africa as well. And so they said, well, this is what we do. We're doing it right now, so we must have done it here as well, except a long time ago. So in Europe, there was a big urbanization, there was a big population, and this population surplus could be exported, and it could conquer new lands. Okay, so Europe was also a technologically superior civilization compared to the Americas and Australia, and also Africa. They had firearms, they had ships, and so on, and they could easily overwhelm, even in small numbers, overwhelm a lot of these natives, because they were fighting with spears, and these guys were fighting with muskets, and you could reach someone way before their their spears could reach you. So they had that kind of advantage, and this kind of advantage was imagined in the in this situation. So essentially, the argument was, people from Europe take civilization everywhere because we are more numerous, we have better weapons, and so on. The problem is, once Indus Valley civilization was discovered, all these assumptions were found to be false. All the three conditions are found to be false. The steppes where they kind of put their homeland now had a population of about 10,000. Indus Valley had a population of 5 million. And there are many reasons for that. One being there was no ice age in India. People kept on multiplying. Fertile land, pleasant climate even during the ice age. So India had a very large population. That this is just incomparable. It is not feasible to say that out of the 10,000 fighting age males would be 1,000, 2,000 people. They could come and just change everything in a 5 million civilization. Technological superiority. So people who are older would remember the claim that the invaders had chariots and iron weapons and so on. Turns out they didn't have iron, they didn't even have bronze. They had essentially what's called arsenical copper. Arsenical copper is a brittle copper thing that's good enough to create like daggers and such, but you cannot create swords. because it doesn't have a tensile strength. You can create a little axe and so on, but it is so brittle that any forceful application of it would cause it to crack and shatter. So, but as a dagger and a knife to cut the things, it's okay because it's not forceful. Whereas in Indus Valley, you had actual weapons which are made of copper alloys and tin bronze. Tin bronze is relatively has high tensile strength. You can use it for weapons. And of course, the administrative complexity and the social complexity needed to be a conquering or a civilization that can impose its culture and language. It requires that sort of sophistication that didn't exist either. The pastoral people were groups of 20 to 200, mostly around 50 to 70 people, herding about 100 animals, 100, 200 animals, and they would never see each other. They would never encounter other groups. The steppes are vast. They really stretch from Eastern Europe to Mongolia, and you would never see, your group is rarely going to see another group, and your animals are going around just, they eat the grass here, they move somewhere else. Every season you move, because once the grass is gone, there's only what comes out after you eat the grass. And it was hard for them to organize the whole population to do anything. And while they did invade eventually Western Europe, in the East there's no signs of them doing anything except just dying out. So this also turns out to be incorrect. So the preconditions of this assumption, of this narrative, have been disproven, but the narrative is still being held on to. Essentially, it has become a dogma. And as we know that if anyone comes in, you see changes in pottery. You see the old pottery from the old place in the new place. That's the minimum you see, because when people move, they don't leave everything behind. They bring certain things, and if there are thousands of sites, you're going to see, at least in some sites, you're going to see some evidence. If they bring animals, you will see a change in the genetic lineage. You will see a discontinuity in its genetics. So, for example, Indian cows are Bos indicus, and in the West you have Bos taurus. You don't see Bos taurus cows until really a century ago. You don't see anything in the Bronze Age. And of course, you would see disruption in the, whenever a large group of immigrants go into any place, you will see their technology coming in, their artifacts coming in, their clothes coming in, their jewelry coming in. You should find that in the site, and you should be able to correlate. So you may have heard people claiming, this painted graveware this is a sign of someone coming from the steppes. No, painted graveware is a local pottery, which actually later we find that it existed from 2500 BC, way before anyone was there in the steppes. But what you really need to say is there's pottery of style X in the steppe site, which is now also in Indus Valley. If you just say there is a different style of pottery in this area, unconnected to anywhere else, that is not proof of anything, right? So, because there is no evidence of anything, the only conclusion would be that people came in without anything, without animals, without clothes, essentially they walked naked across the Hindu Kush. That's the only argument you can make. However, from people who have slight knowledge of the Indian text, like our esteemed Mr. Balaji here, it would be very odd to listen to these claims, because the time that they are compressing the Indian text would be from 1200 to 600 BCE, because once you have Panini, he's kind of dated to 600 BCE, because 550 BCE there's the Achaemenids and so on, and so we know he's before that time. So 1200 to 600 is 600 years, and within 600 years, is it possible to create all the Sanskrit literature, starting from the old Rigveda books, new Rigveda books, Yajurveda with its it has a different anuswara in certain cases. Samaveda with its long vowels. So, that's a linguistic change. So, think about it. It's not that you just start saying it differently today. For something to be composed, that means that change has to spread across the civilization, so that when I compose it in this way, that other person thousands of miles away is going to understand it. That propagation even today, and it's worse in the ancient times, is going to take hundreds of years for linguistic change to propagate. To form and to propagate, it takes hundreds of years. Okay. So, then you have the loss of the accent in the Ityasa and then the Puranas and so on. By the time you get to 600 BCE, it just seems absurd. And of course, we have the astronomical observations. Astronomical observations, the one you see here is essentially in the Gopata Brahmana and the Shatapatha Brahmana. It's mentioned that the year starts at Uttara Phalguni and it ends at Pura Phalguni. Okay. So, this is at the summer solstice. It starts and it ends at the next summer solstice, and it's like Phalguni is that center point, and it's straddling those two nakshatras, and that only can happen. That has happened in 3600 BC. So, that's an observation from there, right? And something even more interesting is that in Surya Siddhanta, it is said that when you are on the equator, you can orient yourself by looking at the north pole and the south pole, which should appear on the horizon. So, if you are on the equator, by finding these two stars, you know which is north, which is south. You can orient yourself and change your direction. That you can only observe from the equator, right? You can probably observe it like Sri Lanka, maybe southern Tamil Nadu, but you can't observe it beyond that. So, that particular pole star on both these poles existed around 2300 BC. So, how is it possible that that can have happened 1000 years later? It's not possible.
I have two questions. One is the continuity which you have shown. So, in terms of development of script, so you have shown a mapping of Indus script versus Brahmi complete table. So, from say drying of rivers was Saraswati around 1800 BC till pre-Buddhist Brahmi, that is completely developed. The development of script stages, maybe for every 300, 400 years. So, is there any chronological evidences available, like how script developed from last 1800 BC to 500 BC? That's the first question. And second one is there any evidences to connect the script with respect to the historical personalities of the place, like the king or the sage, anything which is available?
Okay, good questions. The script, as you saw, so the Indus script is a Bronze Age script. It has some Bronze Age script characteristics. And so, today if you are designing a script, you have the benefit of 4000, 5000 years of hindsight. You can say, oh, it has to look like this, it has to have, you should not confuse two different symbols, we make it as different as possible. You can put a lot of things, but when you first invent writing for the very first time, so if you are saying 4000 BC, first graffiti, they didn't have all of that background. So, a lot of inefficiencies and some kind of ambiguities exist in the writing system in Indus script. At a certain point, they just decided to standardize it and said, we are going to pick the simplest symbols for each sound, and where there are ambiguities, like for retroflex, we are going to create slight variations of the dental, and we are going to create that standardization, and that's what became Brahmi. So, if you look at Brahmi and Indus script, they are very similar. So, as far as the continuity, the Indus script actually continues for a long time. You still see Indus script in Vaishali, for example. You have certain inscriptions that are 3-letter inscriptions that are exactly the same as Indus script. So Vaishali is, I think, 100 CE. In Kiladi, which is in Tamil Nadu, you see both Indus and Brahmi script together, around 580. And in addition to that, you see mixed Indus Brahmi scripts everywhere from Iran to Vietnam. So what is happening is, as the standardization is happening, people are still occasionally writing the old style also. But eventually it got standardized, and it's actually, people thought Ashoka standardized it, but we see in 580 BCE in Kiladi it's already standardized. So there is a trace, it's just that the quantity of material available is not as much as until the royal edict started coming, okay, but it was always there. There's in 1300 BC, there is in Dwarka, Bet Dwarka, and so on. There are many samples like this. So going through all of that, creating a compilation that maybe someone can pick up, okay. So that's the first question. And the second question is, what names do we know? So the problem with names is the Indus scripts, some of them are so small, you don't know what is a name and what is. So for example, there's an inscription Parna. Parna is a name. Parna is the name of a king. Is it the name of that king, or is it the name of another person who just had the name Parna, or is it just leaf? Okay. Certain things like Vamra, we think is a name of a sage, because Vamra means ant. It is unlikely for it someone to, I think it's more likely it's a name than anything else. So there are names of some Vedic seers, like the composers. Some of the other names, like there's something like Dasharatya. So I don't know, is it like Dasharatha, or like is it referring to him? So that kind of in-depth meaning and intent of the writers is beyond the scope of what I can do by myself. Okay, that requires history and a bunch of other disciplines that primarily not my concern.
There was a fact which you have said that about the weapons, the brittle kind of copper weapons. So it existed during the time of Aryan Age, Aryan civilization, or was it Indus Valley civilization?
So there is no such thing. So I don't know what you mean by Aryan civilization. If you mean the steppe people in the steppes, they had copper, and eventually they had tin as well. But what they would do is they would mine the copper, and the copper naturally contains arsenic as an impurity. So they would that alloy, or when they melt that, it would be called arsenical bronze, because it's not purely copper. The arsenic gives it like a bronzing finish, so it's called arsenical bronze. And from that they only made daggers and things. You never find a sword or anything, or the sophisticated weapons you find in India, you don't find that in the steppes. Okay, so that's what they had. But in the Indian subcontinent, in the Indus Valley, the ochre colored pottery, what's called the copper horde culture, they had sophisticated weapons. They had harpoons, swords, and they were very large, right? So the weapons in the Indus Valley, in the Indus Valley civilization and neighboring areas, were much more sophisticated.
Okay. But then again, like a kind of a very shallow information which I have is that they were oligarchy. They were not actually, then why the weapons were being so strong, and it was so confirmed during that time, and they were oligarchy. They were not ruled by a monarch, which I am aware.
Right. So it's not. I think it's not oligarchy. The explanation was that they are like a non-violent, peaceful, egalitarian society. Okay. So that is a projection, or that is a. See, when you look at something, if you just make an idea that kind of explains it, that doesn't mean it's a fact. We know, for example, that in Sumerian inscriptions are decoded, they are read, and Sumerians called Indus Valley as Meluha. So there is a description of Meluhan mercenaries coming in and fighting. So, we know that there is armies, there is mercenaries, and that, by the way, continued even until the British era. You know, you had these pockets of fighting men, that tradition continues, even maybe there are some people today. So, we do know they had weapons. There are some seals, there is I think one or two rare seals where there are weapons, there is a person sitting on a throne and holding weapon, the people holding weapons. So, so what we do know is they definitely had weapons. We also have the arrowheads and you know, daggers and things of that nature. So, yeah, so we do know that at least we know in the Indian subcontinent we had weapons of superior metal and superior technology.
Later you mentioned that the corpus of symbols is around 4,500, and if I understood right, you know, you decoded around 500 of those. So what is the criteria for selection, and how does one convince you that, you know, the current decoding will extend to all of them?
So, the actual number of inscriptions is about it's over 5,000. I think it's close to 6,000, but many of them are broken. They are partial, and it doesn't make sense to read them. The intact ones or the readable ones are about 3,600 or so. Okay, and when you count the volume, you count it by the number of signs, not the inscriptions, because there are inscriptions with one symbol. So, and there are inscriptions with 30 symbols. So, you count how much of the total number of signs you have read, and I have read about 38%. Okay, so roughly half, and we know that the longest ones, I started reading from the longest. I started reading from the 30, and now I am midway between inscriptions that have 6 signs or less. So, it is harder to meaningfully read longer inscriptions than to read shorter. The shorter, it will be just a name, or it will be you know, something like that. It's a higher probability you will be able to read it. But the mathematical guarantee is that since I have already crossed the unicity distance, that is a guarantee that I will be able to read most of them. Okay. So, in the paper, the ones I had, they already crossed, just the longest 50, they already crossed the unicity distance. This is a mathematical property that is held true from you know, information theory. It's always been true.
I'm Subramanian. I've seen some of your listing, not all of them. To my understanding, this method involves you have used Sanskrit as a base and compared. Can you have done for Tamil and established it's not the case? How can we be sure that it's not possible to be any other language which we don't?
Essentially, every language has its peculiar or unique adjacencies to the sounds it uses. Okay. These are fundamentally unique for a variety of reasons, and a word in one language is a random noise in another language for that reason. Okay. And even if you remap the values, it will still be the same because the patterns are unique. So, if you are able to read a cryptogram in one language, not only any other language is impossible, even in the same language a different set of words is impossible. It is completely and utterly unique. Okay. It is a property of information theory. So, we know we can be very confident it is not any other language. Okay. And also the way I would apply this decipherment process is, if I was just a computer, I would take all the world's languages and I would try them one by one. There are 7,000 languages, I would try them one by one of them would work. But because I am doing this manually, I don't want to waste time, 7,000 years or whatever it takes. I want to start with the most probable, and the most probable based on certain patterns in the language was Sanskrit. So, you may have seen that multi-stem compound. So, in one of my talks is there. So, you in many inscriptions you see a long string that is made of separate sections that are also individual words in other places. So, this can only occur in languages that support multi-stem compounds, which are very rare. That's German and there's Sanskrit. There's not many other languages that do that. So, it would be wise for me to pick one of these two and just save a lot of time to get the right language first. That's all.
Since these are all symbols, the scripts are based on symbols, and it's something which we can correlate to our current scripts, right? The way how people would have actually written it at that point in time, each style would differ, right? When they instructed it on metal or place, and those styles would change. So, have you taken into account the variations in like how one person, the way how we write a symbol or people with us, and the way how we write A, you write A, someone else.
So, essentially the question is, because the symbols are hand carved, each instance of the symbol looks different, and how do you know whether it's a variation or whether it's a different symbol? Did we take that into account? Yes, we did. It's covered in the paper. Essentially, we try to find the minutest variation, and if there are enough attestations, we try to detect its value individually, and if they are the same values, you will find a match for it. If they are distinct, you are going to get a null set. So, you let the method determine if the symbols are the same or different. Okay, so it's mathematically done.
And the follow-up question is, were you able to use some of the current programming software that we machine learning to identify some of these things to use this action?
Right. So, essentially the method is well known, and I used regular expressions, and this is a old technology, but it is well developed and well understood for this particular problem. Okay, it's documented for more than 20 years. So, I didn't use AI or anything like this because it's a new technology. People will say AI is all wrong, it just makes up things, and there was no need, because when you have something that is simple, low compute cost, algorithmic, gives a deterministic value, there's no need to use something that requires, you don't need a cannon to squash a mosquito basically.
Regular expression seems quite natural to use here, but can AI be used at all?
Have I used regular expression?
Can AI be used at all?
See, AI is whatever you train it with, and there is not enough to train it with. Honestly, there's about a few thousand, about 36,000 symbols. It's a large language model. There's not enough. You can do it. I just am not sure it will produce anything that is correct.
Give the data to
Yeah,
there's no data.
yeah. You need huge amounts of data, which we don't have.
I just had a couple of fundamental questions. Are we reasonably sure that this is indeed a phonetic script? Because one of the things that we've had is that we have not found the Rosetta Stone, which basically has a Sumerian script and the Sindhu script together, and say we can correlate them somewhere. And this civilization had extensive trade relations with the Sumerians. That we have extensive evidence for that, but there is no two language comparison kind of a possibility here.
Right.
So was this phonetic in first place is the question. So I'll come back to the follow-up question.
Right. So this in the paper it describes why the script is either syllabic or abugida or abjad, one of these things, and it's not logographic. Okay. So the reason is, if you just look at it, it's fairly straightforward that the number of unique symbols is very small, and the frequency of usage is much more similar to the syllabic languages. So most of the symbols are very rarely used, and the majority of the symbols are, the only few are used, And in the early stages of the inscriptions, there are only 71 symbols. So, that is evidence that it could be a syllabic script. So, that is one. The bilingual thing, so you have to understand what bilingual inscription does and why it is important, right. So, whenever you say decipherment, people, somewhere they have read Rosetta Stone, it kind of pops up in their brain. So, Rosetta Stone is needed for logographic scripts. Okay. So, in a logographic script you have a symbol and you are trying to guess its value. And the fact is, if I draw a symbol of anything and ask people what they think it is, everyone will give a unique answer. There has been no case where I have not heard a new answer when I asked what this looks like. And that is because everybody's imagination is rich and they have favorite things, they have biases. Some people will say ice cream, some people will say gulab jamun, whatever. It depends on what you like. But that is not objective, it is subjective. So, if you look at something and say, oh, I think this is a dog chasing a cat, someone will say this is a mother cooking for the child, whatever. What a Rosetta Stone does is, it restricts your choices. So, in a known script, if it says, I, King Venkatesh, hereby bequeath this land, then in the unknown script you are going to expect in the first 3-4 words there is the word king and Venkatesh, right. So, now what happens is your choices are restricted. So, you will be able to cross the unicity distance. Otherwise, if there is no limit on the values you can assign, so unicity distance is essentially the number of keys you can have and the number of invalid symbols you can have. So, if nothing can be invalid, then it is infinity essentially. But so that is what Rosetta Stone does, it forces you to reduce your potential, essentially puts the constraints to make it cross the unicity distance. So, for inscriptions like for scripts like linear B, there was no unicity distance, there was no Rosetta Stone, but it is deciphered, it is accepted. Zodiac cipher accepted. Mary Queen of Scots, her letters deciphered, accepted. There is no Rosetta Stone for any of them. So, anything that is syllabic does not need a Rosetta Stone, and once you decipher it, it is pretty much guaranteed that if you can read beyond a certain size, that is it, there is no other way to read it.
What would have been a very decisive evidence for your decipherment is if we had found, let us say, some personalities mentioned from the Dashratna War, which we know is definitely a historical event of some kind, or earliest this thing. But I wonder, I'm saying, one of the things that still makes me a skeptic of sorts. I'm saying I'm very happy that the approach that you followed is, asking for falsifiability. So that's a interesting thing. Is that river names rarely change, right? So you would assume that, I'm saying, let's say these were the rivers on which our civilization started, and that's a fairly assumption to make. So do we actually find any of the Panchanada rivers, Vitasta, Sindhu, Saraswati, any of those?
Right. So, so far no, I have read only 38%, maybe in the rest something could be there. But you have to understand that if I take your approach and say, for me decisively I need to find the name of a king, I need to find this, everybody has got their own criteria and of what makes them happy. So, there is going to be no universal criteria that we are going to find where everybody is going to say, well, yes, it has this, therefore it is right. And that still is completely can be bogus. There are many decipherments where you find everything, names of rivers, names of kings, stuff from Vedas, because see, when I can assign a symbol any value, the number of decipherments with unicity distance greater than infinity is actually infinity. So, I can have infinite decipherments that have no unicity distance constraint, and therefore, I can create decipherments that have anything you want. it has no value whatsoever unless your decipherment has a unicity distance. What it says is completely irrelevant. It can all be bogus. That is the key thing you have to understand.
I saw the numerical information from based on your paper. Up to the number 9, I saw some symbols. But are there composite numbers that quantify bigger things like 100, 200, 500, 311 or something like that? Second part is there any actual information apart from the sun and the moon in the symbols that you have decoded? I'm particularly looking for any connection with nakshatras and stuff.
As far as the signs that are denoted by numeric strokes, there are up to 10. 10 also is there. It's just that the 10 occurs by itself. It's not with any other sign. So you just read it as the. And there are no the numeric signs are not used to denote numbers. Numbers are spelled out. Like you have dasha, for example, with a the sign and a sha sign. Okay. And there's a shata with a sha and ta. And as far as the next question about the nakshatras, Bharani is named in one of the inscriptions. So yes, they did have the Indian stellar calendar. I have not read the rest. There are other things, maybe other things will also show up, but Bharani definitely exists.
I have a question regarding basically languages, right? For example, even in English and Hindi, we see that language changes substantially over time. And the meaning of words changes and what is being said changes. So, in this particular context, do you think that it would constitute kind of special breeding to say that Sanskrit remains same over the time? I'm aware that Sanskrit as a liturgical language has a claim to not being changed over a period of time.
Yeah. No, it's a very good question. I'm not claiming Sanskrit has not changed. I'm claiming that the inscriptions are in Sanskrit. And the question would be then narrowed to from 2600 BCE to 700 years from then, how much of the changes are there and how much do we see? We do see, for example, evidence of multiple dialects. Okay, and the reason I say that is because the sibilant sounds, the signs for them are interchangeable. Like sha, sha, sa, ha, they are interchangeable, and that is something we also see in Prakrit. So the people who speak Prakrit, they read these sha, sha, sa, ha in the same way. So and also like ja and jha, they write it in the same way. So you see that in the Indus inscriptions. That means multiple dialects already existed, but the inscriptions can continue to use the standard, which, forget the Indus period, even today all the slogans are still in Sanskrit, right? Satyameva Jayate, Shamno Varna. That's your government motto and the motto of the Navy. And Nabas Prasham Deeptam, that is the motto of the Air Force. And in fact, there are something like 100-150 mottos in Sanskrit used by various government agencies in India and Thailand and Indonesia, right? So that has not changed. So your motto, even in the West, like a lot of the mottos are in Latin, even though Latin is not spoken. So I don't think that is any kind of brings any kind of question as to how you can read it. That is one. The second is, if you look at the astronomical information in all the Puranas and so on, it all kind of coincides with 2300 BC, which is in the center of the mature phase. Okay. So there is no conflict there either, and the script is it's not a high fidelity script, it's a Bronze Age script. So some changes we can still read as whatever is in the dictionary, and the actual way they pronounced it, that is a job for people who are experts in historical linguistics.
Per your research, what do you think these scripts or these seals were primarily used for? This script is for? That is one question. And the next is, have you found something that was not decipherable and which is difficult to understand? So,
Okay, so this, what the seals were used for, the seals were used, my guess is the same things that the seals were used during the Gupta era. Okay, so when they say seal stopped, they are meaning the seals stopped in the Indus Valley, but the usage of the seals continued even into the Gupta era. In fact, even into Kaushambi and so on, that even into the Common Era, you have seals that look similar. There is an animal icon, there is an object in front of the animal, and there is some writing on top, and even the themes are the same. So, we do know what the Gupta seals are used for. They are used for identity, they were used for some kind of motto, some kind of slogan of the organization that used it, and membership. Okay. So, my guess is it is a good argument to say that if everything else continued from Indus Valley into Gupta era, the purpose of the seals may also have continued, right. And we also think that because these seals were put on pots or material that were used for trade, that these could be kind of prayers that they sent with the goods, or even as a identifier, like I am merchant X, when you see this, you know that I have sent I am the one who sent the goods. So, it could be that as well. And your question was, is something not deciphered? I mean, deciphered and reading, they are different things. All the symbols are deciphered. If you mean where some of the inscriptions unreadable, there are some inscriptions in the Mesopotamia that were read as Sumerian and Akkadian, okay, in their language. So, that sealing technology was exported to Mesopotamia, where in the beginning they were using the Sanskrit inscriptions, and eventually they tried writing their own language in those inscriptions. Okay. So, as far as the inscriptions in the Indian subcontinent, I still have to read about 60% of them, and after that I can give you an answer, but so far every single one up to length 6 to 30, I have read every one of them grammatically Sanskrit.
Anything that you have deciphered till now, has it debunked any of our understanding of what we thought was the way that era worked, and what has changed in terms of what you have deciphered?
I do not know what people thought. See, it was essentially a big unknown. The people had pet theories. I do not know any of them were actually accepted. For example, this is a peaceful society. They did not have arms, they did not have armies. All of that is just silly, because I do not know any society, even a village of 200 people, where when one person has a lot of wealth, somebody will not try to steal it, or try to take away his cows or whatever. There is always need for order, and when there is need for order, that is when wealth grows. The very fact that wealth had grown so much and trade had occurred so much itself is evidence that they had sufficient method of securing themselves in terms of arms and armies and so on. Of course, later we know from Sumerian inscriptions that they were also exporting mercenaries and essentially doing what the United States does, sends a bunch of people, military contractors. So, we know about that. Now, from the inscriptions themselves, the first and the most important thing is we know that Sanskrit existed in India from at least 3000 BC, possibly 4000 BC. We know that they had the stellar calendar, because we see Bharani in that, which also may mean that the stellar calendar in the Rig Veda also actually refers to the same thing. We know that the names of the Rig Vedic poets are attested, so we know that they have connection to some Rig Veda. We know Rig Vedic thoughts are in a condensed form in many of the seals. So, we know that they are a Vedic society. So, they used to say that these are some kind of non-Vedic adjacent people who were, or something like that, but we know that is not true. Some things we knew but are verified, that these were a Rudra specific or a Rudra praying civilization because of all the Pashupati and all this iconography, and that's what it reads. So yes, we kind of know a lot, and maybe it is useful to, that's a very good question. I think it may be useful to compile a list of the concepts and the things that have been validated by the inscriptions themselves.
So we kind of know that this could be Vedic Sanskrit or the Laukic Sanskrit, one of them. In case the script is Vedic Sanskrit, could those variations be attributed to the accentuations like Udatta, Udatta,
Right.
Swaita?
Yeah, so I used to say it's Laukic Sanskrit. I used to call it post-Vedic, but I found a couple of forms that are definitely Rigvedic. One is subjunctive, the other is infinitive. These two, so essentially one is a late Lakara, and it occurs only in Vedic Sanskrit. So, and now with that, when you combine it with some words that are attested only in the Rig Veda, like Nrahan is only in Rig Veda, it doesn't occur even in the later Vedas. You can now claim that, I can now claim that it is definitely Vedic Sanskrit, okay. And the Udatta and all, see, that notation wasn't till late. In the old ones, they would not put any Udatta, so I doubt that they had it. If there are people who try to, they're still trying to see if the different symbol for the same sound can be interpreted that way. I've tried looking in the past, I could not find any evidence, so I've stopped looking at it.
Just curious, right? So why did they inspire this one, A equals to B, it's not even a statement kind of stuff.
Right.
What would be the rationale behind it?
I mean, we can guess anything, because you're asking what's in the mind of someone from 5,000 years ago, and your guess is probably as good as mine. What I can say is because the Gupta era seals also did the same thing. Okay, they used to reference the compact, they would write it in a compact form. It's just a continuing tradition, and if you continue to look at it today, why would somebody write Satyameva Jayate or something like this? Because it represents their motto, or it has some meaning to them, and they write it. So that's the best I can tell you.
What is your take on why, given this theory is established about information variation and so on and so forth, why hasn't it been solved before? What is your take on that? What do you think?
The universe was waiting for me. No. So essentially, the people who decipher, they come from a certain set of backgrounds. One of them is archaeology. A lot of the things are done by archaeologists because they are very close to the field, and they look at it, and they have the, before computer databases, they are the ones who looked at all of these, and they could take notes and do it. And so, for example, from India, S.R. Rao had an early decipherment. He is one of the very well known archaeologists who has done a lot of good work. And then epigraphers. Epigraphers are just people who read inscriptions that are in like caves and such. That's so Mahadevan tried to do it. The issue is if you made up your mind that it's logographic, then you have to wait for a Rosetta Stone, because as I said, if you just start assigning values, there's infinity of these possibilities, and no one will be sure. So that is why you see 100 different decipherments with 100 different values. You know what I'm saying? Everybody has their own decipherment, none of that agree with each other in a logographic thing. So syllabic decipherments, actually the earliest one I know of started with S.R. Rao. Others have kind of hinted at it before, but S.R. Rao started it, but he could only read single character and double character inscriptions. And then eventually, I think what you really needed was someone with a cryptography background. And as far as I know, no cryptography has tried the Indus script. Linear B, which was found to be a form of Greek, was originally deciphered by Michael Ventris. He was an outsider. He was not from the academia. And then it was redeciphered using cryptanalysis and that is one of the early cryptanalytic decipherments. And then with the computers and computerized dictionaries and regular expressions from command line and all of that, all of these things, downloadable dictionaries, all of this started around the year 2000. Okay. So, I think from the year 2000, the number of people who could do it expanded a lot, but you still, the database itself was not electronic. You had photos of the decipherment, somebody had to read, classify the letters and create the database. So, that database, initially I was actually doing it by hand, and then I found a database which had done the work for me. So, that I think is only about 4 or 5 years old. So, when you add all of this, this has been deciphered actually at the right time. You know, it is within 5 years since it was possible. So, I do not think it's taken years. It's just it's not that I have deciphered it. That's not. I mean, it is a tough because people have been trying for 100 years, but explaining it, proving it mathematically, that I think needed someone with a cryptography background. That's otherwise, if I didn't have that, if I just said I can read it, I would be just another guy, right? Like, why would you be here? Yeah, I also have my decipherment, and everyone will say. So, that is essentially it. It just everything came together. I got a block of time, and I was one of the people who was able to succeed. If it was not me, it would be somebody else for sure.
A small question. In the course of your research, have you ever traveled to Mohenjo-daro or Harappan civilization areas? And if you did, then can you tell us your experiences there which helped you in this research? And if you have not, do you plan to visit that?
Yeah, when I was in Delhi, I spoke to Archaeological Society of India, and we had a very good. They had a lot of good interest, and I was able to. So Rakhigarhi, you know, there's already a park, but I am planning to visit Rakhigarhi, Dholavira, Lothal. Mohenjo-daro and Harappa are in Pakistan. It may be not that easy, but at least some of these sites I will visit, and I will try to get give my perspective of those sites for sure.
So many seals have, like what you have shown, images which tell a story, and they normally have these characters also. So you have seen a correlation between these two. Any examples for that?
Right. So there are two kinds of imagery. One is common imagery that occurs on many seals, like the unicorn is a good example that everyone has seen. There are images of unicorn and completely unrelated text above each of these seals. So obviously it is not related to that symbol must represent the state or some organization, and the inscription bears no actual relation to it. Now, as opposed to that, there are rare imagery that occur in only 1, 2 or 3 seals, like the Pashupati seal, the Lubdaka seal where he is sitting on the tree, and so on. And here usually, but not always, the text does coincide with the imagery, it explains the imagery. So, for example, the Pashupati seal, I have read it as Ashasan Mana, which means honored punisher, since Shiva is known as the punisher of Kama. And by the way, punishing Kama occurs that in many different ways, in many different phrases. Okay. So, the killer of Kama, the punisher of Kama, it occurs in many different ways. So, in those unique seals or the rare imagery, it does correspond in most cases.
Second question is, now I know who has seen your videos, they are aware. What is the way forward? What are your plans?
So, the first thing I want to do is complete the reading of all the seals, because it's one thing to say I have read 40%, it's another thing to say I have read all the seals. Like there is that level of finality on the decipherment that after that point becomes irreversible. The second is the questions I have gotten from the audience. I realize that there needs to be some compendium which illustrates our entire culture and how it originates from Indus Valley, like how everything you do not everything, but everything in Indus Valley continues here. Almost everything continues here. Like I said, Sindoor, swastika, these are obvious examples, but even the minor things, for example, there is a particular design that occurs over and over, which is intersecting circles. And intersecting circles, it's such a common symbol that in Lothal the floor tiles have it, and even in Taj Mahal on that plinth, they have that as well in marble. So it's a very common theme, and what actually it represents is the figuring out the cardinal directions to build a temple or a building, like according to Vastu. So there's the Baudhayana Shulba Sutra that describes how to do it, and that is using those intersecting circles. So those things are very useful for people to know, like they want to know more about these things, and maybe I'll put those things in a book or some form that people can consume it. So that is one, and also I think the symbols themselves, the signs themselves, they represent certain objects. And if you see the photograph of the object next to the symbol, it becomes very clear that's exactly what it is. So it may be worth writing something about each symbol and what it means, what inscriptions tend to take it, and so on. And then maybe a full, so I do have all the inscriptions on the website, but it may be good to have it in a form that is consumable. So that is one, and there are of course other problems I can solve. I can try to address. There's some problems in linguistics, which because of this work, certain aspects of linguistics is falsified. So that I can try to look into that and solve it. So remember this. I'm not an expert in many of these things. It's going to take me time to research that, but that I can do that for fun. And so those are things I could do unless something else comes up, something more interesting comes up. So we'll see.
For more academic acceptability, there is mathematical rigor here, but from taking from mathematical rigor to academic acceptability,
Yeah.
do you see any hurdles or what?
No, so acceptability by whom? That's the question. So if so you can get published in a paper. I don't think that is hard. It is hard, but it's not very hard in the sense if the paper is well written and if it gets a non-biased reviewer, which is not easy in this particular field, but if you find such a paper, it will certainly get published because it's many people have told me this is a well written paper, easy to understand, it has a lot of content, it can be traced, there's a computer program that reproduces it. I mean, there's nothing more you could ask for it. Okay, but just because it gets published, it doesn't mean it'll get accepted. There are a lot of published papers that many in academia will say, no, that is, I don't accept it. That is nonsense. So you can't do anything about it because accepting is not a thing you can force on others. It is something I can, I'm pushing out some knowledge into the world, and people who can parse it without getting frustrated, they will accept it. There will be people whose life's work is invalidated. They will never accept it. Right? Think about it. Like someone has bet money that IndusScript is not a script; it's just some symbols that have no meaning. Their life work is gone. They've worked on it. They've spent 10, 20 years on this, writing papers on this. So now, what are they going to accept it? It's going to be very hard. So if they have intellectual honesty, they should. But academia doesn't work like that. It's about
A lot of the Indologists actually accessed your paper from downloaded it and never commented on it. I'm wondering if you received any incisive critique from anything that anyone would.
So, like I said, the most of the criticism I have received, helpful criticism, has been from people on Twitter. The well-established names, they read everything. Whenever there's an update, they download it and read it immediately. But sometimes a couple of them I just asked, hey, if you have any comments, I would be very grateful. But nothing at all. Because, I don't know, one, they could be just busy. Obviously they are interested in my work. They're reading every little edit. But they have no nothing to give it to me. They don't have, they haven't publicly falsified it or nothing. There's nothing from them. I'm assuming that they find it credible, but they, for some reason they are not saying it. I don't want to guess their motivations because that's the wrong thing to do. But all I can say is I've not received any feedback from any established big name. Now there are some cryptographers I have received good feedback from. There are some linguists who have given good comments on Twitter saying that this is very positive, but I am not from any of the big established names now.
Biggest problems associated with both the Sindhu-Saraswati civilization as well as the civilizational origins of our nation is basically it's a multidisciplinary issue. It's a great thing that you bring a very cryptographic view to this thing, because otherwise we're hopelessly lost in trying to find an archaeological Rosetta Stone, and that seemed almost impossible. But the other angle to this is genetics, and I bring this question because it's obviously there's been a lot of controversy over this. Now we got to explain why there's a linguistic and a genetic affinity between two diverse ends of the population across Eurasia, from Ireland to the Indian subcontinent. So, what is your view of the genetic part of the equation?
Right. So I am still very new at the genetics thing, but I do understand a little bit of the mathematics behind it. And genetics, in my opinion, genetics does not predict language in any way. It's simply mathematically impossible. So, for example, when you make a claim and when you say that you can infer one from the other, or these are related, these are hand wavy terms. These don't have content. These are all I think. That's all they mean. So I always ask these people, what is a testable model between genetics and language? So when you talk about genetics, they talk about all the genetics jargon, haplogroup, genetic distance, this and that. When they talk about linguistics, they talk about cognates and this and that. But in between, there is nothing at all. There's nothing. So ask anyone, what testable model do you have that connects genetics to language? Until they answer that, it is just hand waving. Okay? This is the simple thing for everyone to digest. I am going to go into a bit more detail. So the language has always been known, always, to be acquired from peers and not inherited from parents. This is the standard understanding of language. So your children don't learn the language from you. They learn it from their classmates, their peers. Okay? So when you move to a different city, if the child is born there, they learn it from the kids around them. So many of you who have immigrated, you may know, I know for myself, my kid doesn't speak my language. She speaks English because she's in America. She can understand, but she doesn't speak. And this is a global phenomenon everywhere, throughout history. The only time a migrated people retains their language is when they migrate in large enough numbers that they have their own little network effect, that their peers are also speaking the same language. That's the only time that happens. So if a large population migrates and ghettoizes, that is, it doesn't assimilate with the host population, but ghettoizes in a spot, then their language can be retained. Okay? And if you look at the actual data between genetics and, so I am going to create the model now. I am going to state the model because they never stated the model, but I will state the model. The model is very simple. It's correlation equals causation. Their model is there is a correlation between this set of genetics and this set of language. Now, correlation is causation is one of the most well known logical fallacies. So, you are telling me this entire discipline of language through genetics is based on the best known logical fallacy. That is what they are claiming. Even then, the correlation does not actually exist, because if you look at, so there are two things they use. One is a haplogroup, which is like your male and female lineage, and another is autosomal. So, let us talk about haplogroup first. So, a haplogroup is nothing but a string of codons. It is A, G, T, C, blah, 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 whatever, it is a whole string. And once in a while, there is a mutation, and that kind of you can draw a tree with the changes. So, if you look at haplogroups, there are many places where the haplogroups do not have any connection to the language spoken. For example, in Madagascar, most of the haplogroups are African, but they speak Austronesian, which is the Southeast Asian language. No connection at all. And even autosomal is the same way. Like Japanese are 91% Korean in their genetics, but they do not speak Korean, they speak Japanese. So, if 94% is not enough to change the language, then what is your 1-2% going to do, or 5%, whatever. And if you look at the actual genetics, if you look at the actual distribution of the autosomal genetics, the only thing you can consistently say is that every group is a mix of the neighbors of the previous generation, of the previous generation's neighbors. That is it. That is the only thing you will see in every particular place. You never see language flowing, nothing. Now, and I will tell you why that is. There is no connection between language and genetics. Genetics is information, and in the sense it is information, in the sense it is a information to, it is a hardware, like it creates your bodily hardware, and that can move without language moving, and language can move without the genetics changing. Okay. So, when someone says I can correlate genetics to language, mathematically what they are saying is, when you say variable x is correlated with y, what they are saying is I can write x in terms of y. I can write an equation, let us say x square by 2 plus 3 equal to y. I want to see that equation for genetics and language. You are not going to get that equation. Do you know why? Because correlation only exists among continuous variables, things that are real numbers, and language somebody speaks is a categorical variable. It is a member of a set. So, you cannot even have mathematically a correlation between language and genetics. This is basic math that anybody who remembers their statistics will know. And I am shocked, maybe that is why I said I do not know enough of this field yet, but from the fundamentals it looks like they are just writing a bunch of stuff that has no meaning. That is, like, even in the data, they are claiming there are groups like the Tharo people of Nepal, they have close to 0% steppe ancestry. They speak Indo-Aryan. If they can speak, then why can't anybody speak? And you have the Basque and all of these people, Etruscans, who have 75-80% steppe ancestry. They do not speak they do not speak Indo-European. So, you need less than 0 to speak. You can have greater than 80%, still not speak. So, what does it mean? There is no correlation, even if you are able to create an equation, which you cannot mathematically. The data is just, it just it's so obviously nonsensical to make any of such claim. So, I do not take this claim seriously. It is only a jargon to impress people who do not understand linguistics, genetics, statistics, which is most people. So, I can go to you, and not me, I will not do it, but let us say one of these people can go to you and impress you with words like haplogroup, this and that, percent RNA, this and that, and therefore give a conclusion. Now, your brain is all focusing on all these words that you do not understand, and this guy sounds like an expert, and therefore you say, well, there must be something. But if you look at the fundamentals that, like I've explained to you, this is fundamental stuff. That whole thing is just mathematically illiterate. That whole approach is mathematically illiterate. And I can say it with pride, or I can say it with confidence, that I would love to find one person that can mathematically show me that there is a relationship. And they have to show it for all languages, not for this one particular place. Look, for anything, Japanese, you should be able to correlate for anything, right? I can bet it's never going to happen, because it's a mathematically illiterate statement. Okay, so I'm not worried about genetics, because it's nonsensical. And I'll give you another example. There's a tree called the willow tree. Willow tree used to be XY. So you have to understand what XY, and there's another thing called WZ. XY means that the male gametes are different, and the male gamete decides which gender the offspring is going to be. WZ means that the female gametes are different, and it determines what gender the offspring is going to be. So willow tree used to be XY throughout history, and at one point there was a mutation which made it WZ, and that mutation went eventually around the world, crossed continents. How did it move? How did it move? Who took it? The willow tree is pollinated by bees. Bees can go miles, but generally they pollinate 25 feet from each other. What happened is it chain migrated. It moved from this tree to this tree, then next year this tree to this tree, and eventually it moved everywhere. Same thing with people. What's happening in Ukraine now? There's a war. Men are dying. Women are running away with their kids. Now what happened? Ukraine's genetics, which by the way is allegedly where the Indo-European was. Ukraine's genetics is now moving to Europe. Their male thing is going through the kids, the women are carrying, the female genetics is gone through that. So this is how everything moves, and you can tell that either the haplogroup or this or whatever doesn't specify movement of people, because then you would be able to claim any chain, any string of codons can be used to determine migration. So for example, why not the breast cancer gene, why not Tay-Sachs, why not thalassemia? Can you draw a migration map of that? Can you claim that people speaking a specific language were the ones who first got thalassemia and now they are in all these places? What is so special about any other string of genes? Nothing. One more thing. Map the migration of the Y haplogroup, the so-called male haplogroup, and map the mitochondrial. Completely unrelated maps, because genes flow unrelated to people flowing. It has nothing to do with people's movement, and more importantly, even if you know people's movement from some other source, that has nothing to do with language movement. Okay. Language movement you can only know from attestations of language, that someone spoke this or someone spoke about people speaking this language in this place. That's the only way you can know. Everything else is just hand waving. It's mathematical illiteracy. Sorry, it's a very long answer, but I think it needs to sink into people so that you are not easily dazzled by this jargon.
Are you saying the genetic affinity and linguistic affinity we find across the Eurasian space are totally unrelated phenomena?
Of course, they are unrelated. You can look at any of these distance maps, like you get, and so there are a lot of problems with the way mathematics has been used in genetics. Okay, so for example, if I ask someone what is genetic distance, most of the people who are quoting these papers, they don't know. It's essentially glamorized Hamming distance. Okay, and Hamming distance or in the genetic distance is indistinguishable from geographic distance. So what you have is you have the situation where people who speak Turkish, people who speak Georgian, which is a completely different language group called Caucasian or Kartvelian, Iranian, which is yet another language group. Okay, so in that area near Turkey, Iran, that corner, and you have people who speak Arabic also there. All of them are genetically very close, but speak completely unrelated languages. They are very, very close compared to Europeans who all speak related languages, but they are genetically far apart. relative to this. So, what does genetic tell you? Nothing. It just tells you some people are closer geographically, they mate next village, whatever, and their genes flow and sort of equalize. That is all it tells you. All genetic tells you is that these people mated with these other people. This is all it tells you. There is no other information in there in terms of culture. There is information regarding disease and all that, but that is a different issue.
What do you think should be the next focus area, let's say focused Indian historical effort to discover just the truth? What are the areas that you think should be the focus areas apart from archaeology?
Right. So, there has been some work on dating the epics and so on, dating the old text, the Vedas and so on. I think those are going to take a long time to resolve because the spread among the claims is very wide. I think that would be interesting. I don't think it's that that's going to be that revolutionary as because once you have continuity, the rest is just you're moving the moving the needle left and right, right. So, that is one in terms of the history, but I think more important actually is for people to be connected with their heritage, like it's more of an educational thing for people to know that, hey, this is who you are, this is where you came from, these are the things that were important to your ancestors, these are the things that made them great, and these are the things you should emulate. And essentially think of everything in terms of a civilizational revival instead of academic. Because academic is a thing that appeals to individual people and they follow it. It's hard for me to prescribe that this is the next thing that should be done, but I can prescribe that civilizational revival is as the goal, and everything you do is essentially centered around making that goal possible.
History, programming in Sanskrit, astronomy, like that. If you had to ask that here are the things that are outstanding that I would need help with, and what is there anything like that you would need a bunch of people who are from different disciplines that would help?
Yeah, definitely. So, we have a Discord group, it's in my Twitter bio, you can join there and you can describe your skills, and occasionally we try to get Trello going, but I think the main thing we could do is someone who can manage it and manage the people and give tasks. Essentially, because people are working for free, it's very hard to organize them and keep any kind of timeline. So, that is one of the challenges. But there's plenty to do, regarding the translations, the creating the knowledge base, connecting various civilizations in history like Sumerians and so on. There's a lot of things to do, and right now what is happening is people are finding things, interesting things they're announcing, and that is kind of helping me gather intelligence, and that I can kind of synthesize like a opinion on it and tweet it out. Essentially that's where we are, but a more organized group that works on figuring out the right history and the narrative, not just creating but disseminating is more important. I think that would be very helpful.
I've been exercised about the question of Indian chronology. As you know, there is a wide divergence between what is understood as correct history and what Purana said. Some of the scholars since at least early 1900s have pointed out this. So my question was, and there is a lot of debate and divergence amongst all the scholars, and they don't seem to be able to come on. My question was more along lines of, is it possible in some way to treat, since anyways these are relations between, say, texts, dates, people, etc., to build a mathematical model? I mean, is that possible? Do you think it is worthy effort?
Yeah. So, the dating, there are several factors that go into dating. One is archaeology, one is king lists and so on, some historic documents, attestations. And to the extent that we have the attestations, like if you look at not that far back, like when the Chola emperor gives some land to some temple, we have that in copper plates. So those things we can date with a fair certainty of accuracy. But once you go beyond a certain point, once you go beyond Ashoka, it is very, very hard, because after that you only have essentially the Indus seals. So the only thing that has kind of come close is archaeoastronomy, where you find astronomical references and try to guess a date based on that. Unfortunately, everybody, the results are so, they are not even close. Everyone has a different date. So I think that is definitely something that needs to evolve. And as people argue, I think maybe I think the arguers will continue to argue, but maybe someone who's listening will get new insight and try to figure out a common date. I don't actually know what else could happen unless there's some new writing discovered somewhere. Because see, we know that Indus writing, they were also writing on soft materials based on how the characters evolved. So if we find something that's been preserved for some reason, then that could be a opportunity. That's all I can say.
So you said that genetics is not connected to language. So that means that there is no way to say that such and such a language was created in such a region, in some region. Is there a mathematical model to say that this language was created in this region?
So language is not technically created. Language is attested. Okay, language is attested, meaning somebody has written something down and it existed at that place, or a person who spoke that language wrote something at that place. If there are a lot of writing, like in the Indus scripts, over a long period, over a large distance, then you can say yes, these people were speaking that language at that place. And attestation for Sanskrit only exists in that time, it only exists in Indus Valley, it does not exist anywhere else. So remember, in critical analysis, you look at what evidence is there, you do not look at what possibilities are there. This whole thing of, oh, there is genetics there, therefore it could be that or it could be this, that is apologetic thinking, you do not go there.
So it has to be, see, let us say before Sanskrit there has to be some other language.
Okay.
Before that there has to be some language.
Yes.
Right, so it was created.
It evolves, so language evolves. Yeah.
So can you say that it evolved in such a region, it started from this region at least? So can I say that Sanskrit started from Stepis? Is it possible to say that?
You can say for certain it didn't start there, because now you have earlier date in Indus Valley. Indus Valley 3000 definitely we have, up to 4000 we have symbols, and in 4000 there was nobody in the steppes, like these guys were not there.
So that's it, this thing that's it. So I can say that Japanese started in Japan, that language started in Japan. In the same way, can I say that Sanskrit started in India, for sure? Like 100%, like you say mathematically, I can prove that Sanskrit started in India, so that should be sufficient.
Yeah, so you cannot give a, so that answer is not deterministic. The deterministic answer is the earliest attestation of Sanskrit is India. That's how you say it. If you want a, if you're thinking of some kind of purer form of going and watching there, going back in time and seeing what people speak, that kind of thing, if you want to say, you can say the highest probability is that Sanskrit originated in India. You can say that way. You can give a probabilistic answer. But deterministic is always about attested facts.